Yeah, there's a lot of
And
projection.
so yeah.
There's a lot of projection in reporting about China that I noticed. Like they just assume all the worst shit that ever happened in U.S. must happen in China
Yeah,
too. I mean, it's only natural. I mean, because they feel like that is a normal state of affairs. Like it's
yeah,
impossible for not for like a large country not to commit like atrocities and on regular basis.
yes. And mass, yeah, exactly. Or like that, just because America did genocide, like it's like that's just normal for everybody. I
Exactly.
mean, it's not like you're not, yeah, not like all cultures are genocidal. Like the sort of the Anglo-Saxon culture. And like there's like I don't know, like for instance, the sort of the Russian Empire was not genocidal. It was civilizing. Had like a civilizing mission, like a lot of kind of empires have, and probably like kind of China has as well, like an idea of bringing kind of more backwards, quote unquote backwards people, whatever they perceive as backwards into the civilization. But it's not about like wiping them out, like America did. Like I mean, or like like look, we're in California, right? I'm sitting in San Francisco, but like most people have no idea that like here in California, not that long ago, 100 years ago, I mean, there was like I don't know if you read this thing that I wrote about maybe a year ago, but I found out it's shocking. Like so, after the gold rush, the first governor of California basically put together these authorized these militias, basically these state-funded um, militias that were supposed to go out and kill California Indians, right? And you could, as a private citizen, could invest in that militia. So you could buy a bond, right? Like that was, I don't remember the exact percentage, annual percentage of that. It would the interest on that bond, but you were guaranteed a return on investment if you backed this, genocide militia. Like this is just happening right here, and I don't know, man. Like, so I don't know. It's like, so when there's something very genocidal about Anglo culture, and if you look at the history of other cultures, it isn't always like that. It's like integrationist. It might be like, I don't know, like it might be about sort of like changing the culture that of people's culture, but it isn't about like annihilating entire populations. Um, and I think I think like it's funny, yeah. It's funny. Are you there? Yeah,
Yeah,
you're
I'm
there. I
here.
see the flag waving. Yeah.
I'm just fascinated by everything you say because your writing, the all the writing from Exile Online influenced me a lot when back when in 2000 I was reading because before I just have this idea of okay, all these like falsehood, all these ridiculous reporting in New York Times about China, that's just because Westerners don't get China because China is just the
Yeah.
mysterious Orient that the Westerner cannot fathom. But when I read about exile on how Western reporters
That's
report
funny.
on Russia, I was like, wait a minute, this is the exact same thing they do in China. And then I realized, okay, that's what they do in other countries too, in like Balkans,
Yeah.
in Latin America, and there's a pattern there. It's not, China was not the exception. That was the rule. That's
No, no. Yeah.
how U.S. Propaganda is being conducted, and so that was very eye opening for me. So for people who want to read
Yeah.
about your latest work, where can they find it?
Uh yeah, so I publish on Substack now. So they can go to yasha.substack.com and subscribe. Yeah. I have like yeah, so I'm kind of trying to go through now with just like my own kind of personal family history, and like I'm trying to like trace the evolution of the Soviet immigrant, in America, and of like the Soviet immigrant experience. Um, just because I mean, like because I'm Jewish, right? So Soviet Jews were used like as a huge, in a way, they were kind
Yes.
of like the fallen gong of like the 1970s and 1980s. It's kind of like we weren't being like there were no organ harvesting. Like that would have been a great one, Like I don't think that maybe they came up with that just yet back then, because I think you couldn't. I don't think medical science was like advanced enough to do organ harvesting, right? Transplants back then.
Yeah.
And so but there was like one of the more recent little series that I did was that I kind of particularly like is about how like largely Israel, but also America, kind of like, and the American government kind of joined this campaign in the 1970s and late 1960s and 1970s, was about like this spreading this myth and this idea that the Soviet Union was about to genocide all of its Jews, like on the cusp of like all the Jews are about to be genocided, and so like it kind of like started this campaign through these sort of independent journalists who are like doing independent research on the plight of Soviet Jews, and it like they kind of roped in a lot of really influential people into this campaign, including Martin Luther King Jr. Into convincing sort of Americans. So Israel had a kind of an interesting politics like back then in regard to like sort of weaponizing its large diaspora, right? Jewish diaspora that spread around Europe and the United States, and it's like they wanted. So Israel kind of had like an okay relationship with the Soviet Union, and they didn't want to spoil it, but they wanted like to pressure the Soviet Union into letting go like all these Soviet Jews, because Israel is fighting its own demographic war against the Palestinians, and so it like wants as many Jews or people who pass for Jews, or Jewish passing, basically, because it doesn't really matter in the end. You just want bodies. Because like, what is a Jew anyway? They want to cram as many of them as possible into Israel, and but they didn't want to ruin like the relationship with the Soviet Union, so they did this kind of sneaky way where they were like saying, well, we should just like kind of weaponize American Jews and get them to kind of like pressure the U.S. government, to pressure the Soviet Union to kind of like liberalize its immigration policy for Soviet Jews, basically let the Soviet Jews out of the country. And the idea is that if Soviet Jews leave the Soviet Union, they'll go to Israel. So they kind of had this complicated scheme. It's pretty interesting, complicated scheme, and it kind of worked in the end. It worked, And so, a big part of that was to create the sense of like impeding doom, that like the second Holocaust was about to happen in the Soviet Union. And so they did this whole thing where obviously very few people go to the Soviet Union. So, back then the Soviet Union was kind of like China, in the sense that like nothing really got out. And so you could say the fucking most, fantastic things about what was going on there, and people would believe it. And so and so they there's this whole campaign. It's kind of actually documented by some historians, but it's not really well known by the public. Of Israeli consulate and Israeli government funding journalists to sort of see this. It was a very slow going. It was very cleverly done. It was very slow and organic. And so they kind of they really did influence sort of this Jewish grassroots in the 1970s that then began to be like, oh my God, like we can't let another Holocaust happen. We have to take it upon ourselves to like lobby the U.S. government to get tough on the Soviet Union, I kind of traced the evolution of this campaign. It's pretty interesting. It was very effective. I mean, in the end, it succeeded, and so like it was a multi-decade almost campaign, but that was seeded in a very smart way by the Israeli government.
This was origin of the Jackson Van Neek something.
Yes, amendment. Yeah, which basically kind of like. Yeah, which would restrict trade with Russia unless they like liberalize their immigration policy for Soviet Jews. And so
unless they let
the
Jews go,
basically let my people go, and basically we got traded I got traded, I guess for like a sack of flour or something, Yeah, exactly. I mean, that was an aspect of it for sure.
And there's a
the
China connection to that, because after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they decided to leverage the same Jackson Van Neek Amendment, which originally was designed to force Soviet Union open up for out migration of the Jewish people, to apply to China, because they wanted to, because after the Soviet collapse, they figured, okay, now next China is next, and then we're gonna focus China, and then they and that time they're trying to apply that to China. So every time there's a trade, so every year back before China joined WTO. So every year, China there's a congressional debate in U.S. on whether to extend like the trade
Yes,
status to
the
China.
favorite, yeah, like yeah,
The most
exactly, the
favorite
favorite
nation,
state.
the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
most misnamed
Fav
name. Yeah, most favorite, because like the most favorite nation just means like the normal trading with United, like we are
exactly,
not
yes.
trade with United States. That's what it is.
I mean, just you do a little trade, a little. China does a little trade with the United States, just a little bit.
Yeah.
No, it's insane. I mean, like, and it's also funny. Like, what are you gonna do if you don't trade with China? Like, what the fuck is gonna happen to all your shit that you buy? Yeah, it's fucking
Well,
insane. No, exactly.
but
It's pretty
back in,
interesting.
but that was not
That's a
always
good
true
point.
though. That was
That's
only started in 1990. Like I
no, I know. Yeah,
remember
yeah, yeah.
when I first came to United States, I would get excited when I see like made in China items
That's
in
funny.
like supermarket. Like my first Christmas in United States in 1990, we were so excited to find this teddy bear that was made in China. So my parents bought it for me. And then, like after a couple of years, it's not feel like first we made it a game when we go to the supermarket to see which one. Oh, we go check the label, see which one is made in China. But after a couple of
Yeah.
years, we gave up because then everything was made in China. Yeah.
No, it's funny, and and it's funny because like that's a good point about how these things kind of like have a life of their own, and then they you weaponize in other areas. But and like of course, like for us, the Soviet Jews, like this whole idea, the sort of the idea that the Soviet Jews are under threat of a new Holocaust of the Soviet Union, like the Red Holocaust, which is pretty insane because again the Soviet Union would really save the Jews from total extermination. Pretty much, it's why I'm even around because a chunk of my family got, of course, wiped out in the Holocaust or in the war, the sort of the invasion. So it's this totally insane idea that the Soviet Union is like this, kind of like I don't know, has like it's basically it brings up these ideas of like there's actually no difference between the communism and Nazism. That Stalin and Hitler were exactly the same. So it creates all these different, it sort of like plays into all these different narratives. But this what was kind of interesting, and also domestically, there was also like a split. There was a split under the in the Nixon administration, basically like that Kissinger wanted to come to détente with the Soviet Union, right? And sort of this sort of emerging neoconservative wing in the U.S. government didn't want détente, right? And so they actually were like, oh, this is great. This narrative about Soviet Jews and like the Soviet Jews are being persecuted. They're about to be exterminated. We can actually use that internally as a way of tanking the sort of basically kind of like peace talks essentially between the Soviet Union and America. And so it's like so a lot of these things get weaponized in sort of different ways. So like
I
something
mean,
that
this
started
is
out by
yeah. There's an echo of that today. Now it's all about China is committing Uyghur genocide in Xinjiang, right? I mean, that's why we need to boycott
exactly
Olympics and etc. Like this, even
yes
even Joe Biden, he was like he was actually the one that's trying to walk back from some of the rhetoric, like requesting a summit with Xi. But even during the Xi Biden summit, Biden said, "We are here. We're here to make sure our competition stays a fair competition. It does not veer into open conflict." And like he doesn't even want to say let's cooperate. She
yeah.
actually said let's cooperate and make it
But he was
peaceful
like, we don't want to go
development.
to war, basically. Wow.
Yeah. But like Biden was very careful. So it's like, okay, we just want to make sure our competition stays fair, and let's not go to open conflict. And afterwards, when Biden was interviewed by U.S.
Yeah.
media, he even said like, oh no, she is not my friend. Like I know I would never call, but. Just 10 years ago, when he was the vice president, when Biden was in China,
Yeah.
Xi Jinping was still the vice president. Him and Xi Jinping were in giving talks in a Chinese high school.
Yeah.
Where he talked about like we are not afraid of rising China. Me and President Obama welcomes a rising China. United States.
That's funny. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I
Yeah.
mean, it in a way, yeah, in a way, like the Soviet Jews are kind of. It's an interesting story because, I mean, I kind of do look at it like it is almost the first kind of I mean, right around that time is when this whole sort of human rights narrative, began to emerge as a tool of American foreign policy, under Carter, and then I mean, it was, but even actually before, I mean, that's when they started using maybe the term human rights. But really, Soviet Jews became kind of like, because before then, like no one was like, hitting Stalin or Khrushchev because like, oh, why did you deport all the Chechens, to Kazakhstan, or why did you, like that wasn't a thing. Like that wasn't a thing that people that talked about. It wasn't to use human rights as leverage. And sort of Soviet Jews, the story that got me to America, and the sort of the weaponization of Soviet Jews was really almost like the first American human rights story. It's like how you use, how you kind of you kind of take, a sliver of truth and you completely inflame it, and create like this sort of really horrific story that doesn't really exist on the ground. And you use that as a way of influencing the country, and as you weaponize it, in all sorts of different ways. And so it's not surprising to me, of course. Yeah, like when I was working the Soviet immigrant story and Israel kind of seeding this idea that there's a genocide, being cooked up. Like I couldn't help. I mean, I was writing that as like the Uyghur sort of genocide story was kind of peaking, because it sort of disappeared. You know how these things, they have a funny life cycle, right? They build, and they just like blow up to being the most dominant, most important thing. And like, if you're not talking about it, if you're not acknowledging it, if you're not like railing about it, crying about it, like demanding action, like you're just a fucking genocide denier, you're a scum, you're a piece of shit. And then suddenly it just disappears.
Yeah.
Like it just gone, It's sort of like, again, it's maybe being kind of like inflated again now for the Olympics, but like, that bubble popped. And so a lot of these stories, I mean, obviously it didn't go away because it's going to be reinflated again.
Sure.
It's sometime in the near future, but still, these things have such a funny way of, I don't know, like a way of existing, like to being like fringe and not important, to being the most single important thing. You need to be talking about it now, and like everybody was writing about it. Like even if you're like leftists need to like push China on this.
It's like
blah,
the
blah, blah.
secret trading card U.S. hold in the back of its pocket, and
Yeah.
then when it's useful, like, aha, I got the Trump card right here, and like so your family originally from Ukraine, right?
Well, I mean, my family's from all over the place, so so it depends how far back you go. So as far as I know, so part of my family's from Belarus, part of my family's from Ukraine. I mean, I don't really know. Part of the family that's from Belarus has been there for, I don't know, like generations, centuries. Definitely from like, at least 200-300 years probably. I don't know where they went, like, because then the history of the Jewish migrations gets kind of murky and contentious. Then the Ukrainian ones have also been there for a while. My suspicion is that part of my dad's family actually has like some kind of more either like from the Caucasus, some kind of like more like not middle, because my dad looks like Saddam Hussein. He looks like he could be a Saddam Hussein's like body double, And so he's like, I mean, it's so some Jews do look like that, but he looks, and he's like from Ukraine, so it doesn't make any sense. Like you're not like, so I feel like there's like some kind of either from like, because there's like these mountain Jews that they call them, from the Caucasus, like from like from like the Georgian region, Georgian Chechnya, sort of like the Caucasus Mountains. Like there are tribes. I mean, there are potentially like Crimean, Jews. There's all sorts of Jewish influence that kind of comes in from basically from the south and the middle, kind of not like the, I don't know, like, yeah. But as far as I know, it's the Ukraine and Belarus. If we don't go back that far,
Like by your
parents,
your immediate family, your parents that were before they came to the United States, were they just
my dad? So my mom was born in Leningrad, and my dad was born in like, I think, Krasnodar, but he really, because his dad, his dad actually worked in the Gulag, worked in a prison camp, prison labor camp. He was actually like what they call a politruk, which is like a political officer, like an officer who is responsible for like ideological discipline among the people who like were in the camp. And so he was like, enforcing the Marxism Leninism like line, so in a Gulag. It's pretty funny. Yeah. So like my dad was basically born because he was basically my dad. It was in a, like if you work in a gulag, you basically live in a gulag, you know,
Yeah.
because it's like it's not like these fancy prison camps that, you know, like that exist in America, where like these warehouses, you know, with like surrounded by wire. There's a fence and stuff like that, but like then there's also inmates who are at the end of their sentence. They're kind of living on the other side of the fence in basically a small kind of village, where also like people who work in the camp,
Yeah.
you know, live, and their families live, and like, you know, various like sort of industry that surrounds the camp also exists. So it's like, you know, it's a porous kind of existence. So my dad, there was no hospital there. So his mom, you know, had to travel to the nearest sort of big city. So he was born there, but he grew up in the first his formative years were like on the border with Kazakhstan in Siberia, in like and like just the most out of the way
How did he meet your
locations, you
mother?
know.
How did he
Well,
meet?
he went because he was going to school in Leningrad, so that's how they
Okay.
met. They met in college. So then he moved when his dad retired. They moved to the outskirts of Leningrad. So he kind of lived in the Leningrad area, closer to Estonia, actually, like sort of halfway between Leningrad and Estonia. So they're basically from Leningrad, you know. But my dad has my mom's like a Leningrad, you know, native, born and raised. So, but my dad has sort of like got there, you know, he went to university there. So that's where I was born, and so that's where my brother was born, and so.
Did you talk about your family history in your Substack?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually starting to make my way through it. So just my most recent one is I kind of tell the story of my grandpa who was from Belarus, comes from this sort of like Jewish family, like like just a kind of the Jewish world of Belarus, which Belarus was like, you know, he's from Mogilov, which is like 50% Jewish, you know, like during right before the Russian Revolution, and so it's like comes from the Jewish background, and but he's like a Soviet kid. He moved to Leningrad to work in a factory. Obviously, right a few years later, he fought in the Winter War with Finland. You know, on the Soviet side, he actually went to Poland as part of the division of the partition of Poland between Germany and the Soviet Union, and then obviously fought in World War II, and so I kind of trace this story. Yeah, so I'm kind of working on like the background of my. I don't really know very far back, so like my grandparents are like we know quite a bit about them. Like another generation is very murky. Like I know some basic things about them. You know, like my grandfather, my great grandfather on my mom's side was like he fixed horse carriages. Like, and he actually apparently he the family lore is that he fixed the Tsar's carriage, like because during World War I, the headquarters of the Russian army was in Mogilov. It was the Stavka, you know. And so the Tsar hung out there a lot because he was like the commander of the army and the family story is that like his carriage broke down and my great grandfather fixed it, Nicholas II. And but then you know what I found out though? I found out that a lot of Jewish families from that city have that same story. So like all these Jews are fixing the Tsar's carriage, man. Like, come on.
The entire village was fixing Tsar's carriage that day.
So yeah, so my family, and then so he was my dad. My grandfather was fighting on the front, you know, like basically fighting on the Eastern Front, like defending Leningrad, and then repelling sort of the German armies like the end of the war. So he was part of like the kind of the push that broke the blockade and stuff. But my grandmother, you know, she was in the blockade, and my uncle, he like was 1 year old when he was was a 1 year old kid. Can you imagine in a blockade? I mean, you have like your son is like almost a year now. You know, can you imagine having a kid like basically under siege with no food? But he almost died. It's a pretty horrific story. Like he was like completely his digestive system was like so weak. It was like his guts were almost coming out of his rear end. You know, because he was so malnourished and stuff.
Yeah.
So they got evacuated and in the spring and in the winter, I mean, and then they got kind of sent to the east, and they spent the rest of the remainder of the war there. So I'm kind of trying to like piece together from all this family, because it's like the family story. It's like I know bits and pieces of it, but I'm trying to like put together, like in some kind of like, some kind of narrative that makes sense, that isn't just like little stories that I've heard here and there from my mom and dad. I'd say my parents, my dad's parents are kind of more interesting, I guess, because they were like really diehard communists. They believed it. My parents, family on my mom's side, like they didn't really. I mean, they were like most people, they weren't political. But my dad's parents were like, they met in like a Jewish Marxist cell, basically, that like was like they were like Yiddish speakers, but they were like hardcore Marxists and Bolsheviks. So like that's how they met, and so they were like really like committed communists. They believed in communism, until their death. Like when we're and kind of tragic figures, I think, because in the end, like they didn't really they kind of got like shafted for their, they didn't really. Like people think, oh, you just believe this stuff because you're cynical, because you want power, or you want to like, have a better life, have access to like the better stores, or like, like because it's a kind of a tiered society. If you're in the party, and if you're kind of climbing up the ramps, you have access to like certain things that are not available to the general population in the Soviet Union. And so, but they like just didn't benefit at all, from their like commitment. In fact, they were like got sent to like the worst possible. They got sent to Siberia. To be stationed in Siberia in a gulag is to basically have to be in a gulag. I mean, You're not like, you have more freedom, but you share like 75% of the experience. Like of being deported to the edge of the Soviet Union, to really horrific conditions with like log cabins. Like no modern facilities of any kind. Like I see some pictures from my dad's childhood then. And it looks like it could have been like the frontier, American frontier. You think of like, oh, we're going west. We're going to go west, through the Midwest, over the Rockies, and into California. And like, yeah, that's what it looked like. Just like a log cabins, just nothing there. Like no electricity. Just just like it's pretty gnarly. And so like, my parents have kind of my grandparents on my dad's side have a kind of an interesting trajectory in terms of like the ideology of it. Like they're more tragic figures, I think, in terms of and then of course their children like completely rejected all this stuff. Like my dad is pretty anti-communist, and like feels like his parents are like victims, basically brainwashed victims of this ideology.
You're the offspring of the Judeo-Marxist conspiracy. You are.
Exactly. I mean, no, we are the like the what do they call them, like part of the Judeo-Bolshevik Mongoloid, horde that's taken over the world. Yeah, no, it's funny. It's funny. Like Mongoloids, man. Yeah, that's what we are. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, so like I'm kind of making my way through it, and yeah, people sign up and subscribe to my stuff. They'll kind of get. I'm working my way through that material. So the stuff that I told you about my grandpa. We're gonna go. Like I haven't fully written up yet. Like I've kind of mentioned it here and there, but I want to actually give that because it's a pretty interesting experience.
Yeah.
In fact, right before the like COVID, like the Chinese virus, CCP virus, fucking fucked everything up for all of us. I was gonna go with my dad. We're like planning a trip out to try to find the camp.
Oh wow.
Like that he grew up in, because it's like he was doing all his back research on it, like. He thinks he found it. He's not sure, because it's like it doesn't exist. He was looking at all these satellite maps and stuff like that, and he kind of knew. And so it's actually pretty interesting if you trace. He kind of found it by tracing a railroad line, and then because they built these railroad lines in the Soviet Union, like that led to basically nowhere, to like camps. They kind of like offshoot off the main line, and they go into just like the forest.
Oh wow.
Like and then they just terminate. But like, why are they even there? Oh, because there used to be a prison camp there,
Yeah.
So we were like planning this big trip out there, the two of us, to go and check it out. I hope we'll do it this year, maybe.
You need to vlog it. When you can travel.
No, I was like, I need to like have a documentary crew.
Oh, nice. I mean, like this family history is most interesting to me.
It's pretty interesting. Yeah.
It's to learn about kind of the history through the prison of one family. I mean, that's just listen. I mean, people just freaking subscribe to Yasha's Substack.
Do it, man. Exactly. No, it's pretty. I mean, look, it's. I also like now we're like dads now.
Yeah.
I feel like it's kind of important. You want to leave some legacy, because like.
Yes.
I'm kind of bummed that there's never like no, because I come from a pretty simple family, you know, like simple families don't really leave much of a history. There's not
Yeah.
a lot of letters. There's not a lot of written records of anything, you know. So it's like word of mouth stuff,
Yeah.
some documents, you know, and those old generations, they don't really talk about stuff that
Yeah.
much, you know, like they,
Yeah.
and so my dad like knows, you know, not doesn't know that much, you know, about his parents. My mom knows something, but again, it's pretty limited. So I'm trying to like, I don't know, like I almost see it as a legacy thing. Like I want to put it together. I have the ability to do that, and just
Yeah,
like because it's
absolutely. You
yeah
need
yeah
to
because
write that shit
yeah
down because I just discovered recently, you know, like a lot of the things I know about my grandma and my grandpa from my mother's side because I was raised by them. I just
yeah
realized a lot of things I know my auntie don't even know because just because
yeah
because like I spent so much time with my grandma from what she told me. Like
yeah
so I now feel like yeah I gotta write this down. I gotta like compile this. Like I gotta interview my mom, my auntie, my uncles to get all these stories together because like you said, most of people they maybe know up to their grandparents, and then
yeah.
and
And then
above
and
is
then they
that
also just
they
like yeah, and then just like snatches of information. But it's like so yeah, exactly. So like I'm trying to like also like layer it with like what was actually going on in like the world, you know, around them and stuff, and like try to do like almost like a not just a purely personal history, but also like put it into some kind of political context
yes
because it's that's also kind of part of like because it doesn't really make sense otherwise they just like you know it's like a collection of whatever facts they lived there they lived that they lived that and it's like there isn't really a perspective on it and so yeah so I'm like I was so looking forward to this whole I mean really China man fucked everything up for me you know with this virus that they
it was
unleashed
me
on the world.
it was me I
Why are
push
you
a
eating the
button
bat soup, man? Why are you eating that? Just stop it,
yeah
you know. Just stop eating the bats. You know that's the fucking thing, man. Isn't it annoying? Like if I was you, I mean, you're kind of you're an easy-going guy, you know. But like, I mean, the amount of fucking racism, man. Like, and the amount of like just so okay. I just like that came out of this fucking you know pandemic that like toward you know about Chinese people about how like the you know like it's their like unsanitary eating habits or their unsanitary culinary habits. It's like as if they're like only particularly the Chinese people, you know, like that like unleashed this thing. What's amazing, I was kind of reading this book. In fact, I was looking at I thought about it now because I'm looking at it. It's like this book called it's probably
mm.
backwards. It's called Fear and Politics in San Francisco's Chinatown.
Yeah I can
But
see
looking
it
at it's like from 100 years ago, 120 years ago, there was like a epidemic of the small epidemic of the bubonic plague in San Francisco, and the way that it was like the way that they reported this stuff back then that they're like they basically thought that the bubonic plague is only an Asian disease that like it'll never come to America because Americans are like you know I don't know they're Westerners and so they're hygienic and so like so they're like so they even talked about remember like in early 2020 when like China was like locking down and like taking this virus seriously everyone in America was like that's a Chinese virus
yeah
they're
yeah
fucking they're dirty Chinese people like they'll never come over here
yeah
like they were talking about the bubonic plague in exactly the same way,
yep yep
like 120 years ago. It's like I mean, it's exactly the
I,
same fucking language. It's like it's kind of incredible, man.
Yeah, I mean,
It's like
I
this
was
stuff.
reading
Yeah.
about Hong Kong history. I mean, they actually use the fact that the Chinese are disease carriers and carry plague as a justification to reserve the Victoria Peak, which is the highest mountain in Hong Kong, for exclusively for European settlements. They say, okay, like we Europeans have to need this mountain because this is the only place we can segregate
That's
ourselves
pretty awesome.
from the Chinese disease, and they put it. In fact, they created the Victoria Peak Ordinance
Wow.
for part not. Of course, that's just their excuse, but the trigger for that law was because Bruce Lee's maternal grandfather was planning to buy a house in the Victoria Peak, and that freaked
Wow.
out all the Europeans, and it freaked out the the English governor of Hong Kong, and he's like,
That's crazy.
because just prior to that, Bruce Lee's maternal grandpa's older brother already bought a house. Was already renting a house on the top of the Victoria Peak because they're a very wealthy family, and the house just happened to be right above the house of the English colonial governor, and the English colonial
Ooh.
governor just like flipped.
No way,
He
man.
was
Yeah.
like, "How is this half Chinese man live and their family living above me?" And then he went, and then he heard that Bruce Lee's grandpa also went to visit his brother. It's like, "Oh, you can have a nice house. I have money. I'm gonna buy a house in the neighborhood so all our family can be together." And so all the Englishmen freaked out and they put this
That's
law
funny.
together to exclude Chinese from Victoria Peak. And the reason they gave was, "Oh, the Chinese are disease carriers, a brain plague."
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because like I don't know, I don't really know much about Hong Kong history, unfortunately. But like in terms of just San Francisco history, I mean, I know like in a way, you know how these things are kind of like these ideas that they had, like they were basically kind of based on reality because like at least in San Francisco, like they were like ghettoizing Chinese migrants here and like and making forcing them to live in like just these filthy conditions, like, and so it's like, oh well, I mean, so you're kind of like, oh, look at them, they're filthy animals, look at how they live, so of course they're going to be disease carriers. I don't know if it was similar in Hong Kong, but like in here in Chinatown, the Chinatown in San Francisco that burned down, in the fire in the beginning of the 20th century. Like, I mean, I'm looking at this
because
book is
they're
really
not
great.
allowed to live anywhere else. It was the same thing in LA. It was same thing in LA. Like LA Chinatown was
all
structured
over,
boxing the Chinese immigrants in that little corner.
And in San Francisco, in California, I don't think they were even allowed. The Chinese were not allowed to own property. So, so the buildings that they lived in were owned by these wealthy investors. Like this upstanding citizens of the city, and they're like, well, the Chinese are animals. Like they need to live in this kind of filthy. They can't live in like nice conditions, not like us. So we don't want to fix them up because like they wouldn't even understand what to do with this stuff. So like we're just gonna keep them. And some of these pictures are pretty amazing. Like you have people like living. I mean, it's actually like the worst. I haven't seen conditions like this. I mean, like even like Russian peasants living in like in St. Petersburg in like the beginning of the 20th century, like in these horrible conditions. I mean, had better conditions than the Chinese migrants here in San Francisco at the same time, and like I mean, they literally live in like next to, so like a lot of these buildings didn't even have like don't have like plumbing, right? So like there's like a pit of feces and like urine like that's dug out in the basement. And like they were so cramped, the conditions were so cramped that like some of these people actually lived right next to that fucking pit in the basement. Can you believe this? I mean, so like first of all, no, of course there's going to be disease, coming out of that. Like you just again, you're like, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy or whatever. It's like you're just making the reality come true because but so like, I mean, I don't know. Like I'm kind of being back in San Francisco. My wife was like, when we were looking for an apartment here and all this stuff, it's like you kind of realize, like, wait, San Francisco is such a Chinese city. It's like it's one thing that no one really talks about. Like people are like, oh, San Francisco is a tech city, it's a this city, but it's like actually, before any of that stuff, it's like it's a very Chinese city, like in a good way, and so I'm just like reading this book and I'm just like, God damn, it's like, I mean, just the way that Chinese people are treated here, it's just really, I'm sick. I mean, I can't believe more people are not more like, I don't know, like just like hate American culture and like, but people are pretty pro-American here, as far as I can understand.
I mean,
the Chinese American community, they're so integrated. There's so many generations have gone by that they are basically Americans. So it's
you're kind of. I mean, like look at Eileen Gu. She decided to go ski for China. Everybody flipped. It was flipping out. It's like, how dare you traitor? It's
do you know how much what has her family been here in San Francisco for a long time?
No. Her mom is from China. Her mom.
Gotcha. So she's pretty recent.
Her mom came to U.S. to study, and I think working
first
U.S.
generation. So she's a first generation American, basically.
Yeah. So.
No, it's interesting. Yeah, because I don't know. It's like I mean, just generally, California is has such a I mean, it's fucked up. Like Americans can be Americans. Like if you're like an Anglo-American, like if you're whatever, a white American, like you can call yourself an American. And if you're Chinese, you basically can't call yourself an American. You have to call yourself a Chinese American. It's like, what the fuck is that? It's like, it's like the Chinese people in the city go back so far. I mean, they predate most of the people, come, to live in most of the Americans, like the real Americans.
I remember reading that from author, a Chinese American author, Frank Ching. He is a fourth generation he's fourth generation from San Francisco. I mean, he said about the same thing. And
Yeah,
I
it's
mean, like it's sometimes we subconsciously kind of accept that kind of the
of
mainstream
course, yeah,
paradigm.
no, I do too. You know, it's
Yeah,
like I
I mean,
can't
I
help
was
it.
in
Yeah.
Like me too. Even me, like when I was in Chicago, because I was on the train, I saw these two white girls, taking the train. I just assume, they're more American than me, and then they start speaking
No, but you're like, oh,
Polish.
are you a
You
German
know?
American? What are you? Are you Irish American? It's like, yeah, it's like that's how it should be. Well, everyone should be just hyphenated because like the only people who even this is why I kind of like I feel like African American is a real sneaky racist term. I mean, I don't know, maybe a lot of African Americans might disagree with me, but I mean, just on the very basis of the hyphenation, it's like if you're an American, white American, you don't have to fucking hyphenate yourself,
Yeah, yeah. It's just
and like so I
American.
think black is a much more like I don't know, like true thing because it's like you're just American, but for some reason if you're black you have to like say that your origin is from Africa. It's not even like a country even, like
Yeah,
it's just a
it's a
continent,
continent. You could
so like, imagine hey, I'm not even like Jew or Russian. I'm like a Eurasian. I'm a Eurasian American. You're a Eurasian American. Like we should all be just We should all just be all the European immigrants should be all Eurasian Americans, right? Like it's such a weird.
Everybody is Asian American because Europe is just a peninsula of Asia.
Exactly. So like I don't know. It's like this kind of this very this very sneaky kind of racist
Yeah.
taximony or whatever it is. Like that's applied, and it's like I don't know. You just realize how Chinese this city is, but it means like being Chinese is actually being very American on the West Coast. It's like a very American identity, and like no one really like just in like the portrayal of San Francisco in the popular media or popular like conception of what San Francisco is. No one thinks, oh, it's a totally Chinese and it's a very heavily ethnically Chinese city or like Chinese influenced city. Like no one thinks like that. It's all like you know what I mean. It's always been like erased. And my wife actually called attention to that. She's like, "Why didn't you ever tell me like this is like it's such a Chinese city? Like it's like I'm like that's right. You're right because it's like it's almost been it's like erased because it's San Francisco.
Oh,
How can
because
it
your
be
wife
Chinese?
is from Russia, right?
Yeah, so she's from Russia. Yeah, she's from
Yeah.
Moscow. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so for her, it's like kind of so obvious. It's like, and if you look at it this place with fresh eyes, I grew up here, so I kind of it's a little bit for me, it's a little bit cloudy,
Yeah.
But like looking at it through her eyes, I'm like, yeah, it's true. It's like this is a the Chinese aspect of the city has been totally erased from the popular conception of what San Francisco is.
Yeah.
It's really fucked up because it's a kind of a cool part of the city, and no one really knows anything about it other than there's a Chinatown. You can buy some firecrackers in or something, like yeah.
and even Chinatown today is just being a total tourist trap now. Like
yeah, it's a tourist trap. I
like,
used to go to buy firecrackers when I was a kid. When I was growing up here, like that was the only place you could buy illegal fireworks.
oh, nice.
So yeah.
But
that's what I know.
You can't blow fireworks in China now. Most of the Chinese big city have banned fireworks. They only have like
that's racist, man.
they only have these
That's
drone
racist.
displays for the New Year.
Exactly. Like, can you put a firecracker into a drone and launch it? No, but you can get like the real good ones. The ones that are like this big pack of them, and you light it up, and they just pop off for the whole thing.
Yeah. Like when I was in China back in 1980s, before all these like anti-firecracker law was put in place. I mean,
losers.
During Chinese New Year, it's like a war zone outside. Like people literally shooting firecrackers into like different apartment buildings. Like
all the pets like totally freaked out, right?
Oh
like,
yeah,
all the dogs.
Oh, yeah. Yes, dogs. Poor dogs.
That's funny. Yeah. Well, what do you think, man?
That was a good hour and 45 minutes. I think I'm gonna split into 2 episodes because this is a long talk. I don't know how many people.
Squeeze it all out, man. Yeah.
Yeah. So as one good thing demands the return of another. So I have agreed to appear on Yasha's podcast. This was the price of Yasha's appearance on this podcast on So Can Steal. So people, you can look forward to more of us just talking shit. And
we're gonna be a little we're gonna flip the tables and gonna talk about Carl's experience. and also the Olympics, because I think it's
Yes.
such a messed up story, like the way that just like it's such a perfectly weaponized immigrant story, right? Like so
Yeah,
and I think like
I was actually going to make a short YouTube video about like all the crazy propaganda around Olympics, but like there's just more materials coming out every day. I was like, oh man, this is going to be like multiple episodes. What do I need to cover here? So much
and you're
stuff.
and they're like you're being kind of like you're being sort of again smeared as like a Chinese propagandist, right? In some of these stories. Like they're like comfortably being funded in Bali, in your propaganda studios. I can see the Silicon Steel podcast by Carl
my
Jha, funded by
my
the
my
CCP.
wife, my handler made that.
But you know what, man? You got to add funded by the CCP.
Yes, yes, yes.
At the very end, because it's like because people, you got to say like full disclosure, transparency.
I want to get the tag Chinese affiliated state media on my on my Twitter profile. That is my
that might
goal.
actually boost. Yeah,
Yeah,
no, but seriously, it's like I've seen like I don't know like the Coda story or whatever. It's like that's a pretty recent one, right? They're like I mean, it's incredible that they're just still trying to like pin you as like the main. I mean, it's a badge of honor. I mean, I'm kind of jealous that they're like they're hounding you so much. I mean, it's like you're doing everything right. I mean, they're like trying to make you into this disseminator of CCP memes or whatever. Like
except they're trying to make me into like this airhead surfer dude. Like
I don't know, man. It's the way that they describe you makes it. I feel like I'm like, wow, that guy lives the life. I kind of want to. I want that life. I think people are jealous. They're just jealous, man. I mean, let's just be honest. They're jealous because they have joyless lives, pumping out this stuff and some.
That's true.
Like they're all like on. It's like no. I really think that they really are just jealous, and they are. I think they're jealous also of your personality because you're so easygoing and you're like you can't really be like you can't really. They never really get to you. You never get upset. You're always just like take it in stride and laugh at them. I mean, I think they hate you even more for that.
This is how Yasha got me on his show. Sweet talking to me. Okay,
Exactly.
I'm sold. But let's make it happen. Let's make.
All right,
wait. So what are we going to talk about on your podcast?
Well, I think two main themes. I mean, I think one of the first main thing was like just the topical stuff about the Olympics and just the reaction, sort of the Western reaction against just China generally hosting it, and also like the several kind of Chinese American,
Yeah.
How about the several American,
Yeah.
athletes that went and competed, in their sort of like ethnic homeland, country.
Yeah. I want to talk about that because not just Chinese American are now competing for China. There's several white Americans also competing for China, but they're not getting nearly as much attention.
Oh, that's interesting. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Again, it's like the idea that if you're Chinese American, so you're already like split loyalties, and so in order like to show your loyalty to America, you got to go always with America, always with America, always with America. And if you go to the China side of your identity, it's like bad, it's just anyway. But it's such a horrible double standard because you have foreign basketball players, you have foreign professional athletes, competing in American teams, like professionally all the time. No one in their home countries is called. I mean, maybe some people are, but there's not like an official campaign, to brand them as traitors, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's just not happening. And so, like the way that like actually America in this sort of supposedly pluralistic society is actually, extremely like, I don't know, provincial and narrow-minded and very restrictive, in terms of like what it allows sort of these immigrants, again, these are not immigrants, these are American people, like they're not even hyphenated, to do it. So it's like, that's one thing I want to talk about. But another time is like actually just your personal kind of story. Cause I mean, you're pretty, like, again, pretty interesting in terms of just, we kind of have this segment on our show where we call like immigrant deprogramming, where we kind of talk to some immigrants who basically just because people who are interesting in terms of like they have a different take on like they can like look at America critically, and don't just sort of don't like regurgitate the kind of the there is sort of the received ideology, and like and just do the kind of like just routine, like almost a ritualized hatred of their homeland. You know, like that's what you expect from like immigrants in America. And so it'd be interesting to know how you like what your kind of how you got here. You know, like just your little personal journey.
I'm so looking forward. I'm so looking forward to
you what radicalized you to post CCP
Yes, I'm
memes
so looking forward to be on your show now. So people, make sure you tune into that and check out Yasha Levine's Substack, where he talk about all this interesting stuff and his personal history. Go buy his book, Surveillance Valley. I highly recommend it. I personally, listen to it on audio.com. I learned a lot of things I didn't know before. So thank you, Yasha, for making your time to come to Silk and Steel podcast.
No, I'm glad, man. Anytime. I mean, actually, I think this kind of evening time is the perfect for me, man. Because like, as like, I don't know how you have any time in your life with the kid, man. But I'm like, between having to like, kind of trying to write and all this stuff, and like taking care of the kid, and
we hire.
I mean, I don't like, and kind of like you hire. Well, yeah. Well, we have the reason I moved to San Francisco. The reason we moved to San Francisco is because my mom is here, and so my dad is here. So like, they have like grandma and grandpa here, so that's the nanny.
That was my plan, because we moved, like we got originally we had got a long-term lease on a beachside villa. We like 50 seconds walk to the beach, to the sand, but I'm like, no, let's move, be closer to your parents, to my wife's parents, so they can help take care of his kids. But I wasn't thinking, because my brother-in-law already have 2 kids. They're like 4 and 2. So my mother-in-law is fully booked. So now that's why we hired a nanny. But fortunately, we live in Indonesia, so it's pretty cheap. So like, yes, that helps.
No, it's exactly. You don't need to like be making like crazy Patreon money to be able to afford that. Because I can't afford a nanny in San Francisco money. Even though like the neighborhood that we live in, I actually live right off of Haight Street, and like this, it's like right next to us is like a pretty rich. There's apartments where we are, but like right just a block away from us, it's like beginning to be like these old Victorian houses and in the hills, really expensive, like some of the most expensive houses in San Francisco. And like, so it's like every morning when I take out my daughter for a walk or whatever, like it's just me and the nannies. It's like it's pretty funny. It's pretty funny class. White kids, brown nannies. Pretty like pretty consistent divide here. But yeah, totally. No, I mean, I'm glad that my brother has 2 kids, but they're already old. They're like one is like 16, the other one is like, I don't even know how old he is, like 13 or something like that. So they're like, so she's ready for a new one. My grandma's ready for a new one. So we got pretty lucky in that sense. Yeah.
Nice. All right, man.
You gotta go where the grandma is, man. That's
I look forward to appear on your show. I'll talk to you there. I'll see you there.
Man. See you in a day or 2.
Yeah.
For you, 2 days.
Sounds good. Bye.
All right, man.